as I'm sure 99% of you will already know, we received the DLC trailer for Elden Ring last week, and it's pretty safe to say that everyone's hype meters have gone through the roof. But as we know, we still need to wait a little bit until we get that DLC, so today I'm going to show you 5 more incredibly powerful builds that are also an immense amount of fun to use. So not only will you be ready for when the DLC drops, but these will all be a whole heap of fun to use in the game right now. Also, just as a quick caveat before we get started, this top 5 list is in fact the most overpowered builds that I'm using at the moment, so they're not in any specific order as they're all pretty much as good as one another. But I also wanted this video to showcase off weapons that you probably haven't used before, so it is also bringing in new ideas away from the usual meta weapons that you see, and that way not only am I showing you extremely powerful weapons, but I'm also showing you new ways to play the game and obviously keep it entertaining. And we're doing things a little bit differently this year, as I'm also briefly going to show you the build of the stats and talismans so that you can replicate everything that you're seeing on screen. And I guess obviously with all that out of the way, let's just jump straight into the content. And so, to kick off this top 5 list, we have got ourselves the Ice Lightning build. Now the brilliant thing about this particular build is you can use 2 different weapons, one being the Dragon Scale Blade and the other being the Dragon Hellbeard. That is because both weapons have a unique Ash of War that apply the Ice Lightning to it, infusing the weapon with both lightning and frostbite damage. For me personally, I use the Dragon Scale Blade just because I'm more fond of katana movesets, as I'm an L1 spamming merchant, but either way, each weapon infuses itself with 160 points worth of lightning damage, and then the Dragon Scale Blade gets 60 points of frostbite, whereas the Halberd gets 80 points of frostbite. Again, like I mentioned there, where katanas are a little bit quicker in terms of their moveset, although it's got less build up, it technically still procs around about the same time, as it makes up for the fact by having a quicker DPS, and when you dual wield them, you're going to be doing thousands upon thousands of damage in very quick succession. With the right stats, which I'll show you in a moment, you'll have a base AR of around 600, plus the 160 added on top for the lightning damage, and then a further additional 20% damage when enemies are procced with that frostbite, means that you're going to be doing upwards of 900 AR with each one of those katanas, and the fact that you can get say 4, 5, 6 attacks off in 2 or 3 seconds, you can obviously see why you can do so much damage with these. And then the more fun part about this build is you can infuse it with the Dragon Communion incantations to basically play as if you're a Draconic Samurai, or if you are using the Halberd, maybe a Draconic Warrior, to fit that theme, and also use things like Borrelia's Mist to again help with the frost procs. It's certainly very versatile, as every single enemy in the game can be affected by the frostbite, so even if you're coming up against an enemy like Radagon that's really resistant against lightning damage, you will still be doing incredibly high numbers, as you'll be able to proc that frostbite, obviously dealing that extra damage. And as I mentioned a moment ago, here are the stats for this build, and I also just want to point out the dexterity does show 65, but that's because I'm using a certain talisman, which I'll show you in a minute. So the actual stat for dexterity is 60, and if you are using the Halberd instead because you prefer to use that, all I would suggest doing is swapping the dexterity and the strength around, as the Halberd is more primarily scaling with strength, whereas the Dragon Scale Blade obviously primarily scales with dexterity. And then the 15 Arcane and the 25 Faith is enough for us to use buffs like Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength, whilst also having access to the Dragon Communion incantations. And then as for the talismans, we are running the Shard of Alexander, as that will help boost the Ash of War damage, along with the Rotten Wing Insignia and Millicent's Prosthesis, which is where the +5 dexterity comes from, and then just rounding it off with the Dragon Crest Great Shield, as we've only got 45 vigor, so this just gives an extra layer of protection. Also, for the Wonder Physic, I highly recommend that you use the Thorny Crack tier and the Dexterity Knot tier, as that will again boost your dexterity by +10, and then give a third boost for successive damage, which is super handy with this build, because like I say earlier, you're going to very easily do a load of attacks in quick succession, and if you're a spam merchant like me, you're going to be doing thousands and thousands of damage with this setup. And then if you want to finish off the look of being a cool Draconic Samurai, you can obviously copy the fashion that you're seeing on screen by using Ronin's helm along with Blythe's armor, before then finishing off with scaled gauntlets and greaves. But yeah, as I say, it is really fun to use these weapons. I slept on these, I don't know whether you guys have, because I don't really see a whole load of people using it other than in challenge videos or randomizers, but they really do pack an absolute punch when you create the right build around them, and they can certainly defeat every single boss that the game has to offer. And talking about offers, we've got an extremely special one from MMOEXP, who are once again today's video sponsor. They are the quickest and easiest place to purchase in-game currencies and items, and they of course specialize in Elden Ring as well. So if you wanted to purchase any runes or any specific items that are available in the game, they do provide a quick and easy service for you to do that, and where we've partnered together, you can use my unique code JAZZA to get 5% off any of your purchases. So if you're interested and want to have a browse around their website, there will be a link in the description down below, and if you do happen to purchase anything, of course don't forget to use my code JAZZA, JAZZA, at checkout. So yes, thank you once again to MMOEXP for sponsoring today's video, but of course let's get back into the rest of these insanely powerful builds. And at the number 4 spot, we have got ourselves the Stormcaller. Now this build is heavily around the Stormhawk axe, as it is yet another incredibly unique and powerful weapon that is capable of doing thousands upon thousands of damage against every single enemy. Again, this weapon has a unique Ash of War, the Thunderstorm, which pretty much does as it says and turns yourself into an electric thunderstorm, hitting anybody that decides to get close to you whilst also trapping most enemies. As you can see by the example that I'm showing of me fighting Melania with this weapon, if you are fighting anybody that is of the same stature as you, so essentially anybody that isn't like a demigod or something like a magma worm, you can trap those enemies in this thunderstorm attack before then finishing off with a move that throws them to the ground. This Ash of War has 3 stages, which usually means you can rack up a damage output of around 4,000 to 5,000, but then once you do finish that attack and throw those enemies to the ground, like I say, you will then be able to follow up that attack with a weapon that has an extremely high AR itself, and again will be infused with lightning damage. Where it is an axe, it also does a relatively decent amount of poise damage, especially if you want to use the charged R2s or RTs, and again the Ash of War does a butt ton of poise damage as well, so if the 4, 5, 6,000 damage that you were doing with it originally wasn't enough, you will either 1, break their poise and then be open for a critical hit dealing even more damage, or 2, as I say, throw them to the ground and then just continue to wail on them with the actual weapon itself. Now I'm just going to throw the stats up on screen for you, and just to let you know, the Ash of War actually scales best with both strength and dexterity, which is why a lot of points have been pumped into that. I know it's a lightning strike ability or like a thunderstorm ability, and you'd probably think that faith would be the best scaling factor, but it's actually not, which is also why we haven't really delved into any lightning incantations, although you can do if you want to and use things like the lightning spear or even the honed bolt. But where our faith isn't really being increased too much, you're not going to be doing too much damage with those incantations, so I highly suggest just focusing on the weapon. But if you do want to make it even more fun, obviously feel free to delve into those lightning incantations. But either way, if you just focus on the weapon or also include incantations as well, the following talismans are still going to be very useful, as we're going to be running the Ritual Swords Talisman, Millicent's Prosthesis, as well as the Rotten Wing Insignia, and of course the Shard of Alexander. And then for our Wonder Physic, we're including the Thorny Crack Tier along with the Lightning Shrouding Crack Tier, because although I just said strength and dexterity boost the damage output, it is still a lightning attack, so it still benefits from the Lightning Shrouding Crack Tier, so if you do want to use incantations, that's obviously perfect for that as well. And then just to finish off the look and be the true Stormcaller, we are running the Great Helm along with Caden Armor before finishing off with both Scaled Greaves and Gauntlets. And then essentially with all of that combined, you will then be ready to call upon the power of the storms and use it to obliterate everything that's in your way. And then for the number 3 spot, I'm going to be bringing you the Deathbringer. And as you can see on screen right now, we're utilizing the Black Knife Assassin fit alongside the Death's Ritual Spear. This is sort of like a more fun take on the usual Battle Mage builds, trying to add the element of surprise into it, as well as the Black Knife outfit will make your movement silent even whilst you're running. So essentially you've got the best of both worlds of being able to stay stealthy, moving around without anybody hearing you, whilst also still being able to run and gun and absolutely annihilate anything with the Death Ritual Spear. But you're probably thinking that's all well and good, but what happens when you get into a boss arena? They see you straight away and you can't exactly sneak up on Placer Dusax. Well, that's why we're using the Death Ritual Spear along with a load of other spells as well, so that we still pack an absolute punch even in the boss fights. The Death Ritual Spear's Ash of of War spear call ritual calls upon a multitude of spears to pierce through the sky at your enemies. This happens in a relatively large area of effect and is perfect against the larger enemies like the aforementioned Placidusax or even people like Radahn and the Elden Beast. That is because each one of those spears does around about 200 to 300 damage depending on buffs, and with about 15 or so of them coming through the sky, that obviously means you can do anywhere between 3,000 to 4,000 damage with just one use of the Ash of War. Add in the fact that they do incredible stance damage, and you've got a really powerful weapon that can be used almost instantly and at an insane range to just make the game an absolute breeze. And of course, obviously saying all that, I haven't even mentioned the fact that we're using other spells as well. So you can also throw into the mix things like Great Blade Phalanxes, Loretta's Longbow, the Cannon of Hamer, the Jeweler's Moonblade, whichever spells you see fit for your playstyle, you can put them all into this build because it's heavily intelligence based, as the Spear Call ritual is purely an intelligence scaling attack. And so obviously with that, here are the stats showing that we are pumping everything into intelligence essentially, as other than having the 14 strength and 20 dexterity to utilize the weapon properly, we have then pumped intelligence all the way up to 80, which is its last soft cap, before then splitting the rest in mind, vigor and obviously endurance. But essentially once we have that 80 intelligence, not only have we scaled everything to its fullest, but we also have the full catalogue of spells available to us, which is why I said no matter what spell you want to use depending on your playstyle, you can implement it into this build. And then also just to point out where our faith is obviously so low, we can't use the Golden Vow incantation, but what we can do is use a regular dagger with the Golden Vow Ash of War to still give us at least 15% extra damage output and 15% extra damage negation, which also helps alongside these talismans, because we're going to be running again the Ritual Swords Talisman along with the Magic Scorpion Charm, Graven Mass Talisman, and once again Shard of Alexander. Essentially 3 of those 4 talismans will be boosting not only the Spear Call ritual with the weapon, but also the general spells we're using as well. And of course Shard of Alexander will help out with the Ash of War. And then with the Wonder Physic, I highly recommend including the Magic Shroud in Crack Tier along with the Stone Barb Crack Tier, as that will help break enemy stances even quicker, again creating a build that packs an absolute punch and is actually extremely heavy hitting, even though it doesn't look like it. And actually for the number 2 spot, we're going to be keeping with the intelligence theme, and that's because at the number 2 spot we've got ourselves the Falling Star Mage. Yet again we've got an extremely powerful build that's also versatile, as we're using all of the gravity spells available in the game along with one of the best greatswords in the Ruins Greatsword. This essentially is the complete opposite of the previous build where we're trying to be sneaky and get behind people and do thousands of damage without them even knowing. We're letting people know that we're here and that we mean business as we hurl rocks and meteors at their skulls. Essentially, you've got the versatility for every enemy that you're going to be coming up against, because if it's someone that's a little bit more mobile and obviously isn't going to get hit by the meteor showers, you've got the Ruins Greatsword to chase them and bonk them around the head. But then if you're coming up against someone like Astel or someone like the Fire Giants, a little bit less mobile and a lot more easier to hit with those meteor spells, you can obviously use them, deal catastrophic amounts of damage, all whilst breaking their poise extremely quickly and just absolutely wipe the floor with all of the bosses in the game. Of course, for this specific build, I do recommend that you use the Meteorite Staff, as that's going to boost the gravity spells, but also if you're not a fan of the Ruins Greatsword, you can also use other gravity weapons like the Fallen Star Beast Jaw, as that again has a unique Ash of War, the Gravity Bolt, which can be used at range once again. Or if you want to really challenge yourself, you can also use the Alabaster Lord's Sword, which other than being an absolute tongue twister to say, is also a lot worse than the other 2 weapons. But either way, literally all of those weapons do scale with strength and intelligence, and I highly recommend that you run the following stats that I'm showing on screen for you here. Now I am just going to quickly point out that the endurance and the intelligence stats on here have an additional +2 to each of those stats due to the helmet that we're running, which I'll obviously explain in a minute. So although that you're seeing them as 24 and 62 respectively, they're actually only 22 and then 60. And then the 12 dexterity that we have is for the Fallen Star Beast Jaw. If you wanted to use it, you do need 12 dexterity. Again, either way, depending on what you're doing, both of those weapons are going to be extremely heavy. So for the talismans, first of all, I highly recommend using the Erdtree Favor +2, or failing that, if you don't have it, any of the Arsenal Jars, as they will increase your equipment load. Before then using the Magic Scorpion Charm, Graven Mass Talisman and the Shard of Alexander, to once again boost all of the damage with the Ash of Wars and the gravity spells in this build. Again, for the Wonder Physic, I highly recommend using the Cerulean tier and the Magic Shroud and Crack tier, so then you get the additional damage but also get the 15 seconds of infinite FP to make use of Astel's meteorites. This is going to be the crutch spell that you can pull out at any time once you've used the Wonder Physic to just sit, spam, let all of those meteorites hit your enemies, dealing a butt ton of damage, breaking their poises, and just becoming essentially a Comet Azure 2.0 but with meteors. And then again, where we don't have too much faith on this build, again I highly recommend using a dagger with the Golden Vow Ash of War, just so you have that. But then to complete this build and the fit around it, we are using Herodas's Helm, which is the piece of armor that is increasing our endurance and intelligence by +2 points, before then finishing off with Ronin's armor, the Spellblade gloves for an additional boost in sorceries, and Ronin's greaves. And then once you've obviously combined all of that together, you'll again have a really fun build that uses the meteorite spells in the game, along with an incredibly powerful greatsword, which is just extremely fun to use, especially bonking people around the head with it. So if you are a fan of colossal weapons and maybe want like a new way to utilize a colossal weapon in a completely different build, then this is a build that I suggest you trying, because it is extremely satisfying, especially when you can get the kills off with the Astel meteorites. But of course, that leaves us with one last final build, and this is indeed my personal favorite of the lot. We have got ourselves Holy Knight, and I know what you're already going to be thinking: holy builds fall off at the end of the game, they hardly do any damage. Actually, if you use the correct weapons like Siluria's Tree, you will have an Ash of War that's capable of doing 3,000 to 4,000 damage at a ridiculous range. Add in the fact that this is going to be a high faith build, you can obviously utilize other incantations like the Ancient Dragon incantations that also deal a butt ton of damage, but more specifically you can use other weapons like the Envoy's Greathorn that just obliterates larger enemies in the game. I'm literally going to leave this uncut for you whilst I'm speaking over it, because I think this was the fastest Placidusax fight that I've ever experienced. And yet again, I'm going to reiterate, like I did at the beginning of the video, this is New Game +7, the highest journey, or at least the highest HP defense boosted versions of each boss in the game, and it was gone in like what, 20 seconds? But of course everybody knows the power of the Longhorn, and this build is more focused around Siluria's Tree, which as I mentioned earlier has an insane reach with its Ash of War and does around about 3,000 to 4,000 damage each time that you use it. Essentially you can one bang anything that's roaming in the lands between, and most bosses will die to about 4 or 5 hits of this Ash of War. And of course it's just extremely powerful as you can use it at such a safe distance, deal such an immense amount of damage, and if things do get extremely hairy, of course you can always just pull out the Longhorn to get you out of trouble. This build has all sorts of versatility once again, because if you wanted to go down the Ancient Dragon incantation route, again they deal a butt ton of damage, all doing a load of poise damage, and it's just all round an incredible build to be using. Add in the fact that Siluria's Tree is also a great spear, you're also going to have one of the longest movesets in the game, and you'll have the advantage in close combat as well, so there isn't really anything bad to say about this particular build. And of course, if you want to mimic it, which I highly suggest you doing, here are the stats for you on screen as well. So as you can see, we're obviously delving heavily into faith, along with a little bit of strength as well, just to boost the damage output with the weapon itself. And because we've got such high faith, instead of using Flame Grant Me Strength, we're actually using the Howl of Shabiri to boost our damage a bit more, before then utilizing the talismans, the Shard of Alexander, Godfrey's Icon, Sacred Scorpion Talisman, and finally the Ritual Swords Talisman. So they're all boosting the damage output with literally everything that we're using in this build. And then for the Wonder Physic, I highly suggest putting the Faith Not tier and the Holy Crack tier to boost the damage even more. And again, if you want to complete the look, we are indeed using the Great Helm along with the Gelmir Knight Armor, and then finishing off with the Lyondale Knight Gauntlets and Mausoleum Knight Greaves. But yeah, as I was saying, this build is possibly the most fun out of the 5, or at least my most enjoyable out of the 5 that we've discussed today, and it is certainly one of the more powerful ones because the damage output with this thing is just ridiculous. And with all that said, those are the top 5 best builds that you can use in Elden Ring right now. Of course, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I tried to stray away from the usual OP metas. 1, because we've already covered them before, but 2, I also wanted to bring new weapons into the spotlight and show you guys new ways to play the game and possibly share some new builds and ideas for you to go and have fun in your own games whilst we obviously wait for the DLC to drop later on this year. Like I said just there, please do use this video as sort of like a guidance, if you will. If you want to change up those builds slightly, or if you have different adaptations that you want to share, please do get in the comments down below and share your ideas in there. I know a lot of you come together in the comment section to sort of chop and change the builds that we discuss in the videos, and I'm always intrigued myself to see what you guys are using. So again, feel free to let us know in the comments if you've got any ways to make these builds even better than what they are. And if you don't mind me asking, if you happened to like this at any point or enjoy these types of videos going over 5 incredibly powerful builds like these, do make sure that you hit that like button down below. It's the quickest way of letting me know that you enjoy this content and you want to see more of it, and it helps out the channel a whole bunch, so it'll be greatly appreciated if you can hit that like button. And of course, if you're new around here or you find yourself returning to the channel and aren't yet subscribed, make sure that you hit that subscribe button. That way you'll stay up to date with all of the Elden Ring content and be one of the first to check out builds just like this. But other than that, I just wanted to say a huge thank you. This weekend that's just gone, so the weekend starting like the 23rd, 24th of February, has been an incredible weekend with a lot of new subscribers joining the channel and also a lot of people viewing older videos and obviously coming back due to the hype in Elden Ring at the moment. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody that is watching, and a huge thank you to everybody that has supported my channel so far. It is growing leaps and bounds and continues to do so each month. And if you didn't know, we also have our own TikTok page which has just hit 10,000 followers as well. So everything is obviously going in the right direction, and that's all because of your amazing support. So I genuinely cannot thank you guys enough. But before I get a bit too emotional, obviously go and have fun with these builds. Let me know how you get on, and just know that you're all freaking legends. But for now, I guess I'll catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.